Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, Entrepreneurs the Fiera Series. Many entrepreneurs can say, as Victor Khayyam famously stated, I love the company so much I bought it. Indeed, they fall in love with the company, they buy it, and they go to town with it. They go to the races, make it a fabulous success. But in other cases, the leaders of these companies come in laterally and become entrepreneurs without ever having dreamt about it. They start by serving the company as accountants, lawyers, consultants, and all of a sudden, the organization looks at them and says, hey, you, come here and lead this company. Such is the case with our guest this week, Peter Biro, who did not consider himself at all qualified to lead Newcon Optik, but he was invited to do so in dramatic circumstances that he'll describe, and he succeeded brilliantly. What does Newcon do? Well, if I were to show you some images of people moving around in greenish tones, you could barely make them out, and then you'd have a bit of light and a bit of this and a bit of that, and then some grayish tones, you'd know that you're looking at night vision. We've all become very familiar with it because of the movies. But some people actually make the stuff. That, night vision goggles, and also laser finder technology and all kinds of cool things. That's Newcon Optik's mission in life. And here is Peter Biro to tell us about it. Peter Biro, you're the head of the worldwide Jane Goodall Institute. We'll get into that a little bit later. And we want to talk about your entrepreneurial story, even though you deny being an entrepreneur. And this is Newcon Optik that we're going to discuss first. And I just want to give the viewer an idea of my impression when I read the pre-interview that you did with our senior editor, Francine Blaise. I'm just going to flit through 5 different points because I kept getting a shock as I would go from one point to the other. 1, his father was an entrepreneur who survived Nazi concentration camps. Then we have another gentleman who fled the Soviet Union, who was an entrepreneur. Then a frame-up from a competitor who could end both their lives places you in a dramatic trial in San Francisco. You're acquitted, but not without having a heart attack first. And there's the Iraqi army and an attempt to defraud the U.S. Army. And anyway, it just goes on. And I thought, boy, what a life. And in fact, Newcon prepares a product that is quite peaceful per se. What does Newcon do?
Well, Newcon prepares, has designed and manufactured and sells around the world what we call tactical optics, which are complementary to various weapon systems. They're used for defense, military purposes, law enforcement purposes, and in a limited context, commercial purposes. The equipment consists of night vision goggles and binoculars, tactical day optics, thermal imaging devices, laser rangefinders, and all kinds of very cool technology.
Yes, and there's 3 generations, and it's quite perfected. I didn't even know, but you can actually magnify now thousands of times a tiny source of light in the night.
Oh yeah, well the magic box inside the night vision equipment that we manufacture, which is called an image intensifier tube, basically takes ambient light, which wouldn't even be perceptible to your naked eye, and magnifies it or amplifies it thousands of times.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So such that
that you're looking at what through the lens looks like daylight.
And you'd be totally in the dark.
Totally in the dark.
And so the entrepreneur, the true entrepreneur, you would say, but your co-entrepreneur is Mr. Becker.
He's the true entrepreneur, no question about it.
And he started well, first he's the one who was in the Soviet Union and who came over. Right. But he started in a funny way. He was bartered. He was paid by a client with goggles.
Exactly. He was the bad old days. He got paid. They didn't have cash, and he got paid with a shipment of a pallet of night vision, Gen 1, as it then was, Gen 1 night vision technology. Didn't know what to do with it, and found a market for it so that he could capture some of his receivables, and then quickly saw opportunity and began to study this and think about what he could do with it in a very serious way. And within a very short period of time, he was actually investing in R&D and developing much higher caliber equipment and branching out from night vision to the other complementary areas of electro-optics, including, as I said before, thermal imaging, laser rangefinders, and other tactical.
Which have many peaceful applications. It's not all strictly military.
Well, first of all, just to be clear, all of the equipment that we manufacture and supply is non-lethal. We make nothing that's lethal. Having said that, it would be disingenuous of me not to acknowledge that we are defense contractors, because this equipment is largely manufactured and supplied for the purpose of provisioning military and law enforcement institutions to enable them to better do what they do, which very often involves the use of lethal equipment. But Newcon itself does not manufacture anything that's lethal. What we do manufacture is equipment that is controlled by the government of Canada, and that requires export controls and export permits in order to distribute them around the world.
And thermal imaging could include, for instance, I'm just thinking back now to the 2 escapees from Clinton Correctional, and they sent a helicopter over the forest there on our border.
That's right.
And hoping to find a heat signature.
Yeah.
That could have been your equipment.
Could have been our equipment, the equipment used to find, to go into, bin Laden's residence and identify people and indeed
Himself?
neutralize them, as the term goes, in the dark. Could have been that equipment. It's the same kind of equipment.
So Zero Dark 30 was a Newcon operation,
well,
perhaps.
I'm not going to say which customers we work with specifically, but it could have been. It could have been.
And so to get back to Mr. Becker, he saw a niche. He was not first out of the gates, and somebody gave him goggles. Something did exist, Gen 1,
right.
But he realized how primitive it was, basically, and then he really invested the R&D.
Yeah, and he's not an engineer. I mean, this is a man who, but for the political circumstances in which he found himself in the former Soviet Union, probably would have been a brilliant lawyer, but was denied the opportunity to pursue that dream, and ended up being the entrepreneurial individual that he is, a person who saw opportunity not only to create wealth and make money, but also to actualize his own potentialities, which I think is what makes true entrepreneurs really great. You know, it's not so much about the money, but it is about the expansion of one's horizons and actualization of one's true potentialities.
But he must have had an engineering bent, if only to hire the proper people and evaluate their work.
Well, he had a great brain, and he was the head of a big electronics factory back in the Soviet Union. He had almost 25,000 people under his direct or indirect supervision. So, you know, very,
Probably
very, very
producing
smart
shoddy
man.
goods, and he decided he would not produce shoddy goods.
Well, it's not that the goods that he received back in '92 were shoddy. They were just primitive goods that had a value in the consumer marketplace, something you might see at in a Canadian Tire or a Walmart. But what he realized was that there's much more interesting stuff going on at a much higher level, and he learned about it, and then he became committed to developing equipment that was really state of the art, that was really world class, and that competed with the other stuff that was out there of that same class and same quality and caliber.
And yet, doing great work and doing the right thing and following all the rules, nonetheless lands him in a conspiracy charge against the U.S. Army, and you defend him. I'm jumping ahead, but I just want to tell the people you have a heart attack. He turns around and offers you the presidency of the company. It's a lot of events. Let's take them apart.
Well, you make it sound like the presidency was some kind of sort of consolation prize or something.
A cure for your condition.
It was a curse. It wasn't a... No, well, first of all, as I used to tell all my clients for 20 years, that if you haven't been involved in legal proceedings as a businessman, you've done something wrong, first of all. Definitely. You've been too cautious. You haven't pushed the envelope. You haven't been as aggressive, as imaginative, and as entrepreneurial as you might have been, firstly. Secondly, this was one of those bizarre circumstances and certainly worthy of a novel. And it was happening at the same time that Conrad Black was going through his travails
in Chicago
with the U.S. justice system, is that Newcon had been a supplier to the U.S. Army for major supply to what was then called the Iraqi Army via something called foreign military sales. In other words, the U.S. buys and procures and supplies to the client state. Newcon had been the supplier, and in round number 2 of that same procurement, a competitor who shall remain nameless for purposes of this interview, got that contract, and there was something very odd about it. Something smelled bad about it because Newcon, who was at that time merely my client, was clearly aware that that competitor was not capable of delivering the equipment according to specs. Absolutely. So cried foul. Something probably they wouldn't do today in the same manner. They were a little naive at the time and thought that if you showed people that bad things were happening, justice would be done. Well, Newcon and Mr. Becker learned the hard way that things don't really work that way. And what happened was,
sandbagged.
Well, everyone began to sort of defend their position, including the people involved in the procurement itself, having taken notice because they had no choice of the allegations of fraud and wrongdoing that were leveled by Newcon. Everyone started to defend their position, and that competitor actually, in cooperation with the FBI, let's just say, ultimately framed. Not that the FBI consciously sought to do this. They were quite naive and indeed, I would say, negligent, as was the prosecution. And in fact, the court in San Francisco found them to be negligent in their prosecution and in their investigation.
Because the court acquitted your client.
Not only acquitted, but fully. It was total vindication. It was much more than a technical acquittal. It was complete vindication because there wasn't a shred of sound evidence.
But still, it went on for a few years.
It went all the way to the conclusion of trial, which was terrifying.
And it gave you a heart attack. Let's face it.
I think.
I mean, it happened. At
it would
the same
be.
time.
I think it'd be wrong for me to say that it gave. I suffered a pretty serious event midway through the trial, but as my family members would tell me, I probably had some warning signs that I ignored a few years earlier. So I'm not going to blame it all on my good friend and colleague Michael Becker and on the trial. But there's no question that process was the most stressful experience, and not just the trial, but the entire proceeding, which went on for 3 years, the most stressful experience of my professional career.
Did Newcon continue to operate?
Absolutely, it did, and it was pretty tough.
Sure.
At that time, I was counsel quarterbacking the file. I got local criminal counsel involved on that side of the border as well as on this side of the border.
Was he
He was there for
bail?
quite a long
Out
period
on
of
bail?
time.
Or?
Yeah, on bail. Yeah, it was an extraordinary experience and unbelievably stressful. Stressful.
You let's say it's not directly because of that, but certainly at the same time you have the heart attack.
Right in the middle of it, yeah.
As it reads
I'm working
to me,
from my hospital bed.
As it reads to me from the movie script that I'm looking at, he does whip around and offer you the presidency.
Well, a few months after that, we resolved it, and I was on the road to recovery, and I was back in my law practice in Toronto. He came to me and asked me to come and run the company as president and CEO, which was a ridiculous proposition at that time, and that even today seems absolutely absurd, because I wasn't qualified for the job then, and I hardly think I am today. Having said that, I think that's something I probably will always feel, no matter how well we do, because the skills that he has, I certainly don't possess. But he felt that I brought something different to the company, or that I would bring something different to the company, and that's what the company needed at this time in its evolution.
Well, just like him, you're able to hire technical people. You don't
we
have the
have
technical baggage
engineers,
yourself.
we have salespeople, we have production technicians, we have, front office, back office. It's not just about the skill set. I mean, I think it's about the vision, the strategic vision, and the image of the company, taking it to another level. I mean, the challenge was pretty great at the time. The company had been, I won't say it was blacklisted, but it certainly suffered a black eye as a result of those.
Well, did it lose defense contracts?
It did. It did lose some, and we've regained most of those, and we've certainly gained a lot of other business since then. But it took a while to get people to understand the significance of being accused of something completely wrongfully. Mm-hmm. When we focus on people, the wrongfully accused, when it comes to violent crimes. And the internet and television is replete with these stories, serial or making a murderer, or all of these things that tell these stories about the wrongfully or allegedly wrongfully convicted. Well, this happens in the corporate universe as well, and it did in this particular case.
And what's interesting, too, is not only that he offered you that, but that you accepted. So you had grown close to the company, you had gotten to know it, probably running it a bit for him anyway,
Well,
quarterbacking, as you say.
Well, in fact, there's two things I would say about that. Firstly, I really felt after 20 years on Bay Street, and I loved every minute of it, except for docketing the hours and collecting on the billings. The rest of it was great. I never expected to leave law. And if I did, it would have been for government or for the bench. It wouldn't have been for this, especially for this industry. Because I'm a civil libertarian, I'm a human rights advocate. I certainly never thought of myself as going to work as a defense contractor. But I saw this as an extraordinary opportunity to move completely out of my comfort zone and hopefully to grow as a result. And I think that's happening over the last 5 years. The other thing I'd say about it is that it was the quality of the relationship that really drew me as well. It was about that relationship. My whole career has been about relationships. I don't think you can be a good advocate or properly be the voice of your client if you don't care deeply. And that doesn't mean you have to love them or like them or even respect what they've done. But you have to care very, very deeply about who they are. And in the course of a professional life like that, you're going to become very close to people. And the closeness of the relationship with Mr. Becker certainly made the prospect of working together and collaborating very, very attractive.
I've just flashed back to another defense contractor that we've had on the show who was telling me that defense contractors have a kind of privileged access around the world to heads of state, democracies and otherwise, simply because of what they do. So the guy selling paper clips gets to meet civil servant number 152, but the guy selling tanks gets to meet the president for lunch. You know, is that true?
I often have the privilege of meeting people who are well placed, but I don't know that there are a lot of myths about the industry. You know, we're the most highly regulated industry around.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
There's nothing.
You have many restrictions on who you can sell to.
Tremendous number of restrictions, and if you read the papers, there are stories that abound about that.
You're not on a first name basis with Hafez al-Assad.
No, in fact, sanctions as they are right now would prohibit me from having any dealings with him. But we do business with countries that have regimes that we don't particularly approve of. And when I say we, I don't just mean Newcon Optik. I mean the defense industry and more broadly industry in general. I mean, at a certain point, and this is something I think that people need to appreciate, you're either a trading country or you're not. There are legitimate, the government, its export controls division plays the role of gatekeeper to ensure that you're not engaging in transactions that are viewed as being, not in the national interest or in some cases international interest, particularly when it comes to matters of human rights. But it's a pretty gray area. It's very, very difficult. One of the things that's most troubling to me about this whole issue, and that I have had a lot of exposure to since coming to Newcon, is the whole question of the legitimacy of the industry as a whole, particularly as someone who came with my own prejudices, being, as you indicated earlier, the child of survivors of the Holocaust, and having spent 10 years of my professional life, one of my biggest sort of causes was fighting police corruption in the city of Toronto. I have a very healthy and well-developed skepticism, and if not outright mistrust, of people who carry guns and who are licensed by the state to do so. Having said that, we're in a legitimate business of provisioning lawful institutions to do the work that is necessary to ensure that just and preferably democratic societies enforce good laws, enforce good orders, protect borders, and ensure freedom. I mean, if you believe in those values, the rule of law and freedom and peace and security and the enforcement of justly issued orders of courts of competent jurisdiction, then surely you must stand behind the provisioning of institutions that are designed to implement and ensure the proliferation of those values. And I think it would be tremendously hypocritical of any of us to say, well, defense industry, that's just, forget that. They're just bad. They're warmongers, which is absolutely not the case.
I can see you at the Supreme Court right now in my mind's eye, but I have to switch topics for one
Sure.
last question.
Yeah.
How is Jane Goodall? She's now
She's wonderful.
80. She's 81.
Yeah, one of the loves of my life, and dearest friends, and certainly one of my heroes, lifelong heroes. Yeah, 81 and going strong, on the road 300 days of the year, sleeping in hotels and up in the air in airplanes, spreading the message.
Well, get her some night goggles for Christmas.
I've already done that.
Well, Mr. Biro, thank you so much. Long life and good luck.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Peter Biro. And now here's someone else coming up on the World Show.
What are we looking at behind me is actually my village where I was actually born, some 50